everyone, and welcome to the Victorian Archives Centre for Melbourne Design Week. I'm Natasha Cantwell, Communications and Public Programming Officer here at Public Record Office Victoria. Our event tonight, Beyond Barriers, is part of Public Record Office Victoria's ongoing series of talks and exhibitions where we look to the history of the stories contained within our state's archival records, such as the fascinating architectural drawings that are on display outside. But we also look to the present and the future of Victoria and the tangible ways in which the past plays a part in the contemporary conversations and issues that are important to us now. Next Thursday, we're launching Rewind Forward, our Creative in Residence exhibition, where 5 visual artists have created works that reframe Victoria's historical narrative based on their research into the archives. It's a free event and everyone's invited to that. You can check our website or social media channels for more information about that or our other upcoming events. But tonight for Beyond Barriers, I'm very much looking forward to a rowdy discussion about how inclusive and equitable design should be seen as a creative opportunity that benefits everyone in society. So I'll now hand over to Salem from Folk Architects.
Hi everyone. So good to see everyone here. My name's Salem, I'm from Folk. I want to welcome everyone to Beyond Barriers. This event is about raising awareness about the importance of inclusive design and its role in shaping a more equitable society. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. This is and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. A few admin items before we get started. The event is being live captioned, so if you would like to access the live captions, there is a QR code that you can use to access live captioning. After everyone's presented, we'll have time for questions. So anyone in the audience who has a question, leave them to the end. Anyone who's joining us online, you can leave questions in the chat. So we have 4 presenters today. Starting us off is Tim from Folk Architects. He's going to be talking about, inclusive design. Inclusive design in shaping a more equitable society and how it presents a creative opportunity. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Sal. And welcome everybody. Let's make sure this works. Okay. I'd like to start off this evening by sharing with you this quote from Arthur Chan. For me, and for us as a practice, I think it sets the tone and the scene for this evening's discussions, and in my view, it encapsulates everything. And the quote reads, "Diversity or difference is basically a fact of life. Equity is a choice that we as a society can make. Inclusion is an action that we can take, and belonging is the outcome of that action." So this evening's presentation is somewhat informed by my daughter Alfie, shown here on the screen. So 4 years ago, Alfie came into my life and she expanded my world, both as a parent and as an architect. As you can see here, Alfie is a wheelchair user. She's non-verbal, and her list of medical conditions are wide and varied. She has level 5 cerebral palsy, she has epilepsy, and she has cortical visual impairment, or CVI. But Alfie is far more than just a medical diagnosis. She's also a cheeky and determined little girl who has taught all of us at Folk and beyond many things. The first thing I think, and most importantly for me, is that Alfie doesn't need fixing. And it's taken me a while to realise that. But I now know that as a society, we have to do far more to accommodate the diverse needs of people living with disability. As a family, the other thing I've been reflecting on when I've been putting together this presentation is that as a family, when we're at home, we just operate like a normal family unit. But Alfie's differences and disabilities become far more obvious to us when we're out and about in society. And we see that the barriers to inclusion exist everywhere. This map is a great example of this. So planning outings with Alfie require lots of forward thinking and planning. This is a map of accessible change facilities in and around Melbourne. And we will, and families like us, will refer to this map when planning our daily outings. So whether or not a building or an area has an accessible change facility, for us, can mean the difference between venturing out for an hour or two or the full day. As architects, it's expanded our thinking and allowed us to see the built environment through a new lens. We see the opportunities for improvement and understand that good design, in our view, celebrates the diversity and difference of each and every one of us. And there's statistics here as well. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of these, but when you look at the statistics, they basically tell us that at some point in our lives, we will all experience disability, whether that's directly or indirectly. So, and this is often referred to as no obvious discernible disability yet, or NODI. More than 1 in 5 people in Australia have a disability. And so to put that into context, that's 20% of the people in this room here this evening. Disability is a diverse term. It can include physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments. And disabilities can be visible or invisible. So in short, I think we need to reframe our thinking and realise that disability and difference is just basically part of the human condition. Equity is a choice. More than a choice, I would strongly argue that equal rights, equal access for people with disabilities is a basic human right. It's actually highlighted in the UN Convention of the Rights for People with Disabilities. And we believe that we have a social obligation to treat all people equally, regardless of their age, size, gender, race, sexuality, or ability. As with other forms of social change, it's people that have instigated the action. So the person that you can see here on the screen, his name is Jeff Bell. In the 1970s, he was aged 21, he had an accident that left him a quadriplegic. And in that time, when something like that happens, he basically was institutionalized into an old person's home, but Jeff refused to accept a system that didn't see his full potential. And it was people like Jeff that began pushing back, demanding independence, inclusion, and equal access for all. And this wave of activism helped shift care away from institutions towards community support. And many of you in the room will know about this. It led to landmark changes in government policy, including the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, and something we're very familiar with, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, brought about in 2016. But again, reflecting on our role as architects and designers, inclusive design should be far more than just simply complying with government policy. It's about considering everybody and everything and seeing difference as a creative opportunity, not a constraint. So where do we start as designers? I think the first port of call really is realising that in order to create inclusive environments, we must first recognise that it is often the barriers in society, whether they be physical or often social, that disable people. The most common barriers include attitudinal barriers, environmental barriers, institutional barriers, and communication barriers. In many ways, all of these barriers are interlinked. And we as architects can play an important role in advocating for inclusion. So by creating accessible and welcoming spaces, it then encourages people with diverse needs to participate in society, which increases visibility and representation and can lead to a shift in people's attitudes. In short, I want to see more people out and about with diverse needs. And I think that will help drive change. Again, reflecting on our practice, this is actually quite a beautiful example of a ramp. But when we're working on projects, we often find that compliance and accessibility is treated as a technical or a legal problem. And it's often something that's retrofitted into projects well after the design's underway, often at great expense. It sends a message to people. I don't like the way that people are treated as a technical or legal problem. It should be something considered as an opportunity. And the best examples of inclusive design today are based on challenging perceptions and modes of practice, bringing together people with different lived experiences at the exception of a project, and starting from disability can be a powerful creative force for design. Our experience in this space of user-informed or co-design leading to a positive outcome is reflected in this project that we recently completed at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. It's a new changing places and parenting room, facility and parenting rooms. And for those of you in the room that aren't familiar, changing places facilities are essentially larger than standard accessible toilets, and they provide safe and dignified access for people with high support needs. So as architects, when we were first gifted this project with the exhibition centre, at the beginning we asked ourselves, what makes for a good changing places facility experience? And beyond the obvious technical considerations like creating a safe environment and facilitating people in a dignified way, how can we create a memorable experience? Before we put pen to paper, we ran a series of workshops and distributed questionnaires to people with lived experience, as well as therapists and support workers. One of the most prevalent and common responses of that exercise was for the space to feel warm and inviting, almost sort of domestic, I suppose, and not clinical. And really, it led me to realise that people with complex needs often spend enough time as it is in hospital settings. And the user feedback on this project has been very positive, and it's an example of how bringing people together with lived experience into the project from the outset can create a sense of ownership. Belonging is an outcome. In many ways, the benefits of inclusive design is not just about the practical outcomes of providing access. Importantly, it can lead to a shift in people's attitudes by increasing representation and sending a message that everyone, including people with disability, are welcome and included in all aspects of society. We believe that the built environment should not only accommodate but celebrate difference, whether it be people with physical disabilities, neurodivergent people, those with hidden disabilities, not to mention the ageing population. And I would like to imagine a world where families like ours don't need to refer to maps like this when planning our daily outings, where people have the freedom to move around as they choose and the knowing that they belong. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Next we have Nick Morris, a gold medal winning Paralympian and universal design consultant. Nick will be sharing his insights on universal design.
Hello and thank you. Tim, I can't help but think of all those wonderful things that you said, and it brings me back to me as a person. And it's amazing how often a symbol can reflect a person. And I used to be a design on a parking space. Now I want to show movement. I want to show that I'm active and out there. And just by the way, I actually don't have a disability. I've just got shit to do each day like everyone else. I was Superman in school production, untouchable, playing sport. And then one day I decided to jump on a motorbike with two other blokes riding at night. And unfortunately, riding along, light went out on the bike and we went straight ahead and hit a tree. Guy in the front got a broken leg. Guy in the middle got a ruptured spleen. I got 7 broken ribs, 2 shattered vertebrae, 2 punctured lungs, bruised kidney and a fractured skull. So I don't screw around when I have a go. But all of a sudden, one moment, your mum's wondering whether you're going to actually make it through the night. And then all of a sudden you turn around and about 8 years later, you've just beaten the Americans in the semi-final and beaten the Poms in the final at the Paralympics. And pure adrenaline is running through your veins. And it becomes quite emotional because what happens is all of a sudden all these terms that people put on you actually don't matter. And all of a sudden we start going, well, okay, do I have a disability? Well, no, I've only got a disability if there's not a toilet over there. And what is sustainability? Well, sustainability is when the whole of the community is included for the same price as everyone else. That's true sustainability. And so what we do is we move through life and we start to think about, well, who does it actually affect? It's not a disability. What it is life. And neurodiversity, put your hand up if you think you're normal. I do in my own world. But the thing is, and I don't want to cast aspersions on people with neurodiversity, but put your hand up on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock if you've just had enough. And we're all like that. And that's what happens is that we need to start thinking this is not about those people over there. This is about these people here. And we start to get our shit together and we start to think about, okay, what's really important in the design of the environment that I want? Do I want nice air? Do I want nice lighting? Do I want all those things? Of course I do. Are they normal? Yeah, they are. Are they special? Shit, no. Fatigue and people with obesity are massive issues that we're working on for the Olympics right now. Two of the biggest things. So the DDA, there is a federal legislation. Let me just cast you to something right now that's happening today. The disability standards on accessible public transport. If anyone in this room came with me to the Elstonwick train station and tried to push up the ramp, catch a low floor tram, guess what will happen? A low floor tram wouldn't happen. There is no low floor tram stop and the ramp would need 2 people to push me up the ramp. The DDA was in 1992 and DSAP had a 20-year time frame to get its shit together. The reality is I can't even jump on public transport right now. Is that acceptable? Of course it's not. What's universal design? Universal design is all these amazing architects in the room looking at the environment in a different way, you know what, designing it so it's good for all people. There's nothing special. So, a couple of examples. Reception counter. It's beautiful, it's architectural. Do I need space under it? No, because I'm not preparing a dinner and I'm not writing an essay. What am I going to do? I'm going to communicate with someone. What's the problem with that design? There's a dirty, great big computer screen in front of me. Why? Why is there not a laptop or a tablet that sits down low so that there is face-to-face communication? The National Australia Bank, I think have done a great job. I've worked with them for a long time. You think about the old tellers network and things like that. There's multiple different seating heights, there's tablets, there's all these things, there's bright colours, there's difference in contrast and things like that. The iPhone is the greatest gift of, let me rephrase that because my 14-year-old drives me nuts with his iPhone. It can get someone who is vision impaired within 500 millimetres of a given point. It can tell me and Tim where a changing places facility is so that I can go and either use it or get there efficiently. It can tell me when the next low floor bus is coming. It is amazing. It's got colour and contrast. Why is it that we don't put indicator bolts on the inside of toilet doors to make sure that we're happy that the door's closed? Who gives a shit that outside they come to the door, you do that and the door's locked? You don't need an indicator bolt. 4 times I was at the Melbourne airport and 4 times I walked in on people. It was horrible. And the last one, lighting. Kelly Millar's here somewhere. She's there, she's at the back. An access consultant of the highest note, there is nothing in the standards that we apply right now that has a requirement under the building codes for a particular lighting level across any pathway anywhere. Really? So once again, universal design, put it down low. Wellness. I'm not going to read all these things, but these are all the things that we can start to look at. change rooms without urinals. So when the female football team comes in, they don't have to worry about what is a male pretty bad thing. Changing places. I'll give you an example as to why it's not just Tim who needs a changing places. I jump out of my chair onto a table to pull my DAX up. Just a bit of info. My mate, who is a lawyer, who is working on the Bushfire Royal Commission, had a stroke. He's now 53 years of age, the same as me. He can walk 2 kilometres. He can mow the lawns. He doesn't know his mother's name. He's incontinent. And to take him to the movies, they need a changing places facility. Motor neurones and MND are some of the cruelest disabilities coming around. We need changing places for those people as well. But there's so many of those things that are really simple: accessible accommodation and mobility aid hire. The Traveller's Aid in the city right now, you can go there. If you have someone who's elderly who can't make the distance, get them in a scooter. It'll cost you $20. They will have the greatest day of my life. I put my mother in a scooter. She went to Chadstone. She walked off my daughter, who is 18 years of age. 5 hours they spent at Chadstone because they could. What's it all about? User experience. We're talking about the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and I'm currently working with them to develop a universal design accessibility strategy. What's it about? It's about user experience for everyone. Everyone's user experience could be different, but the outcome should be the same. We start at website communication. We work our way through. We talk about transport. Can I get accommodation? I stayed at a place in Fortitude Valley in Brisbane. It was fantastic. The accommodation was awesome, fully compliant, could get around, no problem. It was on the side of a freaking hill. I couldn't even get out to go and buy a hamburger if I wanted to. It was the only place available. And once again, customer service. And Sydney 2000 was amazing for a number of reasons. There were 30 to 40,000 volunteers who were educated about how they help someone like me. And the simple message is, how can I help you? And I'll give you one reason why you do that. I was wheeled up to a curb and a man came up behind me and he said, "Can I give you a hand?" And I said, "Yes." And before I could tell him what, he pushed me and not my chair. I went forward, chair stayed still, Superman again. Oops. It's my take on universal design. It's going to happen to everyone through your life cycle. One day we're dependent on our parents to get around, and one day we're going to be dependent on our kids to get around. And that's the reality of it. And that's my take on universal design.
Awesome, mate. Very good.
Thanks, Nick. Next, we have Janice Florence from Arts Access Victoria, who will be discussing the importance of co-design and bringing lived experience into the design process.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Janice Florence from Arts Access Victoria. I'm the Manager of Consultation and Training, and we do a lot of consulting mainly within the arts industry, sometimes with local government, around disability action plans and... Okay. Did you hear any of that? Okay. And sorry, we do disability awareness training, and also a broad range of access issues, and we always look at a broad range of access for neurodivergent, complex mental health, deaf, people who are blind or low vision, physical access, of course, intellectual disabilities. And so we look at a wide range of access, and surprisingly, and especially found out through the MAPCO project, that all of those types of access are affected by design, by our consultants' reactions. So the first, this shot that's up on the screen, is an image on the website of Hassell Architects. who've been commissioned to develop the main public realm area of the Melbourne Arts Precinct. It features a nighttime image of planned urban garden. Yeah, so and I'm just going to give a bit of description of it because on principle we try to give audio description of images in case there are people who are blind or low vision in the audience. So there's large winding paths with the NGV and Arts Centre by night. You can see a wheelchair user on the path, which suggests that the new design will be accessible and welcoming for disabled people. So in 2023, Arts Access Victoria was engaged by Melbourne Arts Precinct Corporation to provide accessibility feedback on the planned transformation. Specifically, in the first instance, it went on to get bigger after that, but we were asked to look at what at that stage was called a vertical transportation node, also known as a lift, to be placed inside of the turrets on the Sturt Street side of the current NGV, leading up to the level of the public realm gardens, and also an entrance to the new gallery, the new contemporary art gallery. The lift is adjacent to a large stairway leading from Sturt Street to the raised urban garden and the new gallery. Arts Access Victoria assembled a group of deaf and disabled advisors, and this is a common practice because we're aiming at co-design and consultation in all projects so that things are given direction from the beginning. So we assembled a group of advisors and we on the lift and also on the later on the public realm itself. And we had a wheelchair user who's a parent of small children, and that sort of gives you a few elements you have to deal with. A low vision advocate, a neurodivergent advocate, and an advocate who also had mobility issues, and an Auslan user and a complex mental health advocate. We were provided with detailed images and plans for the area. However, so anyway, we haven't used any of those because they're in confidence. The feedback initially about the turret lift included concerns that it would not accommodate a large wheelchair or scooter, and that the entrance would be unsafe to find in the dark, surrounded by trees. There was also a concern by the low vision advocate that the entrance was one way and the exit was another to the left, which wasn't intuitive for them. The group was very concerned about the stairway generally. I guess when we're disabled people are confronted with a stairway in a new building, we kind of think, why? I mean, traditionally it's been kind of a status symbol in architecture, I guess, for institutions. And, you know, with all the ingenuity in architecture and all of the aesthetic experience, we think perhaps maybe stairways could be left out. But anyway, and also because there's a separate entrance, it also separates one lot of people from everyone else. We don't get to go into the main entrance as everyone else can. So we're still like a separate, segregated group. And also the wheelchair user who had a small child was concerned about not being able to stop a small child from running down the stairs if they were on one of the landings. The child could get right down to Sturt Street. So this led to a larger consultation. There might be another slide. Yep, so there's the gardens again. So this led to a larger consultation with MAPCO, and we ended up working on their disability action plan with them. So this affected processes throughout all facets of the organisation, including employment, communication, as well as programming and upgrades to Federation Square. The depth of insight that advisors gave on the public realm designs was incredibly rich and insightful, and I learnt a lot from it myself. It included comments on the surface of paths throughout, slippery paths were a concern, slippery surfaces, and having seating that allowed wheelchair users to sit with friends, so having spaces in the seating. And also Auslan users being able to face each other in the seating so that they could communicate with signing, and also lip read if necessary. And also they had a concern about lighting at nighttime events in order to see lip reading and to see signing clearly. It included suggestions for accessible lighting for people with sensitivity to LEDs and clear signage and wayfinding so that people who are neurodivergent or with complex mental health wouldn't be overwhelmed. And also the curved pathways are of concern. They look very nice and they're very appealing, but they're of concern to the neurodivergent advocate and also the advocate who's blind. Because they felt they would be very difficult to navigate. And the neurodivergent advocate said that she could see pathways of design emerging so that people would just cut across the grass and kind of cut their own pathway through the space. So MAPCO is still finalising their disability action plan, and we're still unsure how much these suggestions will be incorporated in the eventual outcome. So we're talking here about universal design, and the first drawing indicates features added, and we've all mentioned this, to mitigate inaccessible design, for example, a narrow ramp on the side of stairs or a lift around the back of a building. Apart from not complying with the DDA's Disability Discrimination Act's requirement for independence and dignity of access, it's also not the most comfortable way and could be unsafe to enter a building. And again, it separates people off. So universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialised design. Lots of people are confused about what universal access actually means, and the difference between adaptive design and a genuine approach to universal design, which embeds accessibility at the front and centre of the design process. And this is why we advocate for consultation in the early stages. The slide has two outlines of buildings to show the difference between the two types of design. Even if a gentle slope and a guardrail were added to the adaptive design, it still would be not a comfortable way of entering the building. On the right, the building has, and also be confusing for people who are blind, I think. On the right, the building has been designed with two long wide ramps with guardrails as the main entrance. Everyone can use these buildings to get into the building, and we're part of the mainstream. There are still stairs to the side for people who want to use them. So here we go on to our concern with universal design in practice. So universal design is a process as much as a practice. This slide outlines some key features of universal design as a practice. So co-design, engage deaf and disabled people in genuine consultation at the start of the planning process, not as users at an end of testing approach. Accessible consultation, ensure your consultation and feedback processes are accessible and include a mixture of site visits, online meetings and face-to-face meetings. You may have to provide printouts or audio versions of plans. MAPCO was great actually in providing audio described versions of plans for the consultant who was blind. Pluralism, consult with a variety of deaf and disabled people with different lived experiences of access barriers. For example, wheelchair users with small children. The wheelchair user with a small child that we had as an advocate was very concerned about being able to get to parts of the garden that only had narrow paths in order to pursue their child if they ran off. And yeah, so looking at a range of features around people's lives. Advocate expertise. Engage deaf and disabled advocates with experience and connection to our communities who actually speak with expertise on behalf of their group, of their community. So we look at universal design as a process based on developing a relationship with the anticipated users of a space, not just something that's presented later on. And, you know, my own experience is that I've often found little things in places that are supposed to be accessible that aren't actually accessible. I guess a small example is a mirror that's way up here in an accessible, accessible toilet. And more serious things that make it hard to use. For deaf and disabled people, universal design invites us to consider design as a relational process. It cannot meet all access requests, but can enable an ethical relationship of dialogue and co-creation that can facilitate a different way of understanding social inclusion and participation. And at Arts Access, we subscribe to the social model of disability, which says, and not the medical model, which is sort of the previous model, but still very dominant, that says your condition is your concern. And, you know, you can get equipment to try and be able to get around, or you can have an operation that will fix you up. But the social model says that removing barriers is society's concern and is therefore all of our responsibilities. And in order to create an inclusive society, we need to remove the barriers that stop people from participating fully. And that includes Auslan interpreting, audio description, places where neurodivergent people feel comfortable. For example, because we mainly work with arts organisations, performances that are run as relaxed performances where people won't be overwhelmed with sensory stimulus, and circumstances that are better for people with complex mental health. So we get fantastic feedback from our advocates about this, and we consider this wide range of access needs in our consultations.
Thanks, Janice. I think it's really important to understand what the barriers are in the built environment that inhibit it from being accessible to everybody. So I think sometimes we don't realise that those barriers can be easily fixed. They're not that difficult to fix.
Yeah.
Next we have Susie Quinton, Principal at Hassell Studio. Susie will be presenting Hassell's work on the Melbourne Arts Precinct.
This will be testing my technology prowess. Fail. Yeah. Okay, click it up this way. This is good. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and such an important topic that we're discussing today, and a real passion of mine, and one that I have great fun with designing with a fantastic team, one of which is sitting right next to me. I'm here to talk to you today about Larkbundab, which is the Melbourne Arts Precinct Public Realm project. Salem, I appreciate that you did the acknowledgement already. It is such an important part of our project and all of our projects to also do an acknowledgement. Particularly on Larkbundab, we've had a phenomenal engagement led by MAPCO with our Wurundjeri elders, the aunties. They bring so much joy, and they're so generous with their time and their insights, and they've really shaped and helped inform our design through from plant species, how we interact with materiality and expression across the public realm, and the use of water within the public realm as well. And one of the aunties bestowed the name Larkbundab of this project, which means heaven's beauty. and it's a meaning of place of people coming together. Always gives me shivers. So this image is the broad spectrum of the Melbourne Arts Precinct as a whole. It's a precinct master plan project made up of many parts, the public realm being one of them. It spans from the Hamer Hall right on the northern side of the site all the way past the Theatres building, which is getting a massive refurbishment by NH and Snowheader, NGV International, and then all the way through to what will become the new NGV Contemporary, delivered by Candelabras Architects. And the Hassell, and partnered with Soil, are delivering the public realm, which is going to be a new 18,000 square metre public realm, bringing plants to the people. And this project for us, conceptually, from the very beginning, was about providing a place for people, art and performance coming together in a garden. And that's been our concept, and it was part of our pitch in the original bid submission, and it stayed true from 2018, which is when we started working on this project, all the way through, and this will be delivered in 2029. So it's a it's a long burn, but one that we've significantly enjoyed and had challenges along the way, but it's always been good. For us, we couldn't do it without a significant range of very special consultants and talented people. And as I mentioned, Morris Goding, Nick Morris, leading the forefront for our accessibility and universal design principles, and more recently Jensen Hughes as well. But this is just a raft. I think there's 14 consultants that we work together on this with, which is fantastic. And it's all rafts of services, from accessible and universal design through to mechanical, hydraulic, electrical, planting designers. We've got an amazing Australian planting designer on our team called Jack Semler, who leads Superbloom, as well as James Hitchmo and Nigel Dunnett from Sheffield University. What I want to talk about today is that the public realm is envisaged as a new place for Melbourne. It's not an urban park or an urban plaza, it's not a botanical garden, but it's something new as part of the Melbourne Arts Precinct, and it will be a real cultural icon that stands aside some pretty heavy-hitting architectural icons with NGV International, what will become NGVC, the Contemporary Building, Hamer Hall and the Theatres building. They're all amazing, iconic piece of architecture, and the public realm up until this point has been a little lackluster around there. So we've already got a steep improvement that we're trying to make. But what we really want is this public realm to be a new place that has an identity in its own right as a destination, somewhere that people want to go, are invited to go, is immersive, and they're encouraged to go there repetitively to come back for this supercharged, amazing public realm. And a key part of that is making it accessible and universal. We've been, as I mentioned, on this project since 2018, and we started right back at the beginning in terms of we got a brief, and it was a very detailed brief, and our first project, or part of the project, was doing a return brief and a functional brief, which Nick was instrumental in doing, setting the principles and strategies for universal design that shaped and has continued to shape how we design and test the design against all throughout this. As Janice mentioned, we've also had MAPCO, who's our client, engage with Arts Access Victoria, which has been fantastic. We weren't directly involved in the consultation, but we did receive some of the comments, which is very helpful. You'll probably still see some curved pathways. But we can try and work on that. But as I mentioned, the existing identities of these buildings really form the backbone of this precinct. What we are trying to do is create this new ground and connection across the public realm. And as part of being that garden for art, people and performance, we want to create this immersion with nature. And a lot of our testing in those early phases in that functional brief was actually working out the proportion of planting to people. How much planting do you need to really feel the sense of immersion? And at the moment, we've got about 60% plants, 40% people. And the intent is that from the very beginning, we just sort of said cover the whole thing in plants and then just carve out exactly what you need for people to move through the space. And that's sort of been part of the ongoing conceptual nature. Across the precinct, it's divided into 5 garden typologies. Working from the north, we've got the dynamic grasslands, which I'll talk a little bit more in detail about some of those universal principles in a minute. Through to the ridges and ranges, which is our high point of the site. We actually transfer from St Kilda Road up a couple of metres to make an accessible threshold to the theatres building on the western side, and then we go down again to ensure that we have a flush transition through to St Kilda Road between the theatres building and NGV International, and then we flatten out a little bit and go, and then we go, believe it or not, up again to tie into NGV Contemporary before the ACA team take over with the stair and the lift that Janice was talking about earlier. And throughout these is the flowering slopes, the valley floor and garden state. So working back from that southern side, we've got garden state, and it's a really, it plays homage to the Victorian character of garden state in terms of those beautiful mixes of exotics or like natives and non-native plants, supercharged seasonality and colour and immersion, and it connects the 2 galleries, so you can have a whole experience walking traversing between one gallery to the other and experiencing the garden between. Throughout the garden itself, we've got a range of different sculptures, both permanent and temporary. And then we've got this stitched together network of pathways and cleared spaces for a roaming programming and activation program, which is charged by MAPCO. As we move up towards the north, we go to the flowering slopes, which has a sort of Mediterranean steppe feel in terms of the planting, but it's a real key transition point in terms of the levels, and this might look a little bit new to you because we spent long hours on this area particularly because it's one of the tallest level changes across the site. We actually transfer about 3.5 metres across this area from sort of the north to south, and that's so that we can create this accessible threshold from level 7 down to level 6 of the theatres building and back out onto the streetscape. And we had many conversations around what's the best practice in terms of, do you provide a VT node or a vertical transport node or a lift and then level platforms, or do you do graded gentle pathways that people can traverse across? And that was great debate and one of much discussion. And originally we had a series of vertical nodes all across the public realm. So we had platforms and vertical moments of transition. And then the client sort of came to that point and sort of said, instead of benching these levels, let's just change the levels of the entry thresholds to the new buildings where we can, so we don't actually have to transfer as much in terms of that level, so we can actually do more gentle graded slopes instead of really extreme, long, windy, crazy paths. So our primary pathwork network, which is the widest network across this, ranges in terms of width from 2.5 metres up to 7 metres, and they are very, very gradual slopes. So predominantly, there's like a maximum grade of 1 in 20 across the entire public realm, but typically you're sort of sitting at around 1 in 30 across the public realm. And then we've got a secondary and tertiary pathway network that allows you to traverse through the garden, have different experiences, and they're all linking and looping, so you can take a different direction and find your way through the space to get a different experience of the planting in the gardens each time you visit. Moving from the valley floor, which is that St Kilda flush entry from St Kilda Road through to the north, so you can see that primary path going really directly to the south, which connects you to NGV Contemporary. And then up to the north, you get through to the ballet building and the western side of the theatres building, and that connects into that flowering slopes, which have some of those tough level conditions. Through to ridges and ranges, which is the highest point of the site. It's intended to be some of our more woodland canopy experience in terms of a bit more lushness, a bit more verdant planting, and a space of respite and relaxation, and a calmer space, threaded together with artworks interspersed throughout the public realm. And then moving through to the dynamic grasslands, which is at the north, and the iconic forward surge sculpture, which I'm sure you all recognise, which I found out quite recently was painted blue not too long ago for the Commonwealth Games, which I thought was quite a nice little tidbit of information. And I've actually really enjoyed seeing some of the beautiful architectural drawings of road grounds of this area and some of the earlier iterations of this area. This particular space, and so this is a view looking south from the northern part of the precinct, if you were floating above Fed Square really, looking towards, and you can sort of see that new public realm transition. And what I should mention is this new public realm is built on both existing structure and new structure. So we're, as part of the theatres building refurbishment, they're building a new deck structure that extends over Sturt Street to create half of this new public realm that we're building on top. So effectively, it's one of the largest roof gardens that you'll come across. This is an aerial view of that dynamic grasslands area, and it's one of the most challenging in terms of levels and creating an open and accessible public realm, and one that we've worked through quite a lot in a lot of detail to get those levels right, to ensure that people feel welcome and invited into this space. At present, there is a very handy canopy in terms of rain protection that stitches together the theatres building and Hamer Hall, but it creates a visual barrier and a blockage. It sits across a bluestone plinth that limits your access onto those art centre lawns, which is designed by Roy Grants in terms of providing a space for people to gather and enjoy. But actually, you have to go to the very peak of Hamer Hall to get there, and then any of those pathways are not accessible. They're very steep and they're very narrow. And so part of our work is actually regrading that whole area to create a wide open, generous moment that you can transfer north to south and feel invited into the public realm. So this is what it currently looks like. This is a white card render, but couldn't get quite the right angle on my phone. But you can sort of see even the sight lines to the sculpture is blocked. You can see the bluestone wall that creates this hard edge to the public realm there, and the pinch point in which you actually have to traverse around if you want to get up onto the lawns itself. So as you can see, we're still going to retain a good section of it just from the retention of soil, but we've really opened up that and created a very generous threshold and a wide pathway, which is about 3.5 metres wide at that entrance, and it sweeps up past forward surge and enables you to engage with the public realm, and reflecting the image that Janice showed before as well. So ideally, hoping that it's an open, inviting, immersive public realm. Just another little spruik for some of our special consultants that we work with and the research that forms part of this project. We've got two subset projects for the public realm itself, the test garden and the planting trials. The plant trials are hosted at University of Melbourne in Burnley, so we know that the planting has to work super hard and it has to work, and so they're trialling over 1,000 plants to make sure, to test their traits and characteristics to ensure that we've got enough data so we can make sure that plants for the people stand the test of time. We also get jealous of architects. Architects get to build prototypes. So us landscape architects decided we wanted to build a test garden. So we have built an example of this public realm, and I'd really encourage you to go and have a look. It's behind Fed Square. And it's a little piece, it's 300 square metres. It's, actually this is the trials first, we'll talk about this first, but the trial sits on the University of Burnley's rooftop, and it tests different substrates and harsh conditions and tests those roof garden conditions so that we can prove up the use of plants, both non-native and native. That's our PhD candidate doing some check measures of how the survivability of the plants is going so far. He's coined the term duds and studs for the plants. And then we've got the test garden, which despite all best efforts was actually built in the height of summer over a few days over 40-degree weather. And I myself set out and planted half a dozen of those plants, which is very exciting. But it's a piece of the puzzle. It's 300 square metres, which is a 60th of the size of what we're trying to achieve in the public realm itself. But I'd encourage you to go to have a look, and if you saw on the exhibition itself some of the examples of the flowers and the cuttings that I actually cut this morning from the test garden, and explains that some of that sensorial and tactility of the plants that we're trying to achieve. Some of them are a little bit smellier than others. You might get a bit of an onion smell from some of the alliums from there, but you're welcome to take those if you'd like. So that's the test garden. Please go and have a look, and that's me.
Thank you, Susie. I'd probably argue that the public realm or in-between space of that project, in my view, is the most important component, really. And I think about, you know, if you're someone from interstate, overseas, and you're coming and visiting the Arts Precinct for the first time, coming down from Flinders Street Station, this is our first experience of the precinct. And it's the first opportunity to create that welcoming environment. So yeah, there's some heavy hitters around it, but I think it's the most important piece of the puzzle in my view. So now we're open to question and answer and panel discussion. So over to you guys. If anyone's got any questions, we can field them.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I had a question from Susie for the landscape proposal. Like, that was a very fascinating part. And because we have botanical gardens very close by, and William Guilfoyle's idea of like all those curvy paths, like creating mystery throughout the garden, like is that concept kind of reflected in this new precinct, or like is that there are some ideas of planting which were taken from the closest botanical garden?
There's a couple of questions in there. The curvy nature of the pathway didn't necessarily come from botanical gardens, but I quite liked your phrase of creating a sense of mystery and experience. The curvy nature for us was around trying to create a sense of experience and how people can transition. And the network itself is designed so in links, loops and journeys, so that you can traverse and see different layers of planting, different sight lines and view lines. And the plant height itself enables you to sort of look up and across the topography in different ways and experience different immersive characteristics, I suppose. Now I've forgotten your next question. So the curvy pathways.
It was also about the concept of the planting.
The concept of the planting. Yeah. Thank you. So the concept of the planting, the 5 typologies of gardens, was inspired by the landscapes of Victoria itself. So dynamic grasslands, for example, is inspired by the Victorian volcanic plains. And as you move up to the ridges and ranges, that was inspired by some of the woodland characters, and particularly around, if you've ever driven around the Black Spur, that side of things. And so each typology is inspired by a different area that you'd find across Victoria to sort of drive. And it's not trying to recreate those characters in any way. It's being inspired by them in a new naturalism and planting diversity approach.
Thank you.
Do you see that kids will run into the gardens and pick and play, and because there's so much garden, I can imagine it would be very inviting.
Oh, sorry, can everyone speak into the microphone so people at home can hear you?
Did you hear me?
Well, I can repeat it back if you like. Yeah. The question was around, do you envisage children to be able to engage and run into the garden and pick and be immerse themselves in the garden itself? And there is a lot of gardens, so that offers that opportunity. Does that summarise it okay? Yes, is the short answer. We really want people to engage with the plants and the gardens. Perhaps not run through it per se, but because we've got this network of pathways in terms of that primary, secondary, tertiary, the idea is that you can run or traverse in whichever way or form through lots of different aspects of the garden. And that might be on a stepper path or a gravel path or a paved path, and there's lots of different materiality and textural approaches to sort of encourage different experiences for different users. In terms of picking flowers and touching them and smelling them, absolutely. This project is a moment for bringing plants to the people and expressing the wonder of plants, you know, because they're amazing. And as part of the test garden, and one of the aspects of that is actually testing the programming and activation and how it can use the garden to engage with people and community of all walks of life. They've had art classes, drawing classes.
Test garden's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, you've been? Oh, yay. And so they're starting to sort of demonstrate how people can engage with the plants and not just be limited to picking, but also doing scavenger hunts and all sorts of things. So, yes. Long-winded answer.
Question probably for Nick and Janice. As a practice, we're looking for best world examples of universal design. And, you know, we had that Zoom meeting a few weeks ago and we had some examples of like, no, don't show that one. Who's doing it well? Like recently I was in Athens and every single room of a hotel has a universal room. The Ace Hotel in Sydney has one universal room, except to get into the building is not clear and is not equitable in my view. So, you know, I presume the Scandinavians always do a good job of this. I think there's beaches in parts of Spain that, you know, everyone's out and about, an ageing population. Like where are our world's best examples that we can aspire to?
I think you just answered the question, which was, we all do it really well. I'm a bit of a probably biased, but I really like Melbourne Park. And the reason I like Melbourne Park is one moment it's hosting the Wiggles, the next moment it's hosting Andre Rieu, and then I believe the most accessible event outside the Paralympics, which is the Australian Open Tennis and All Abilities Day. And so I think as Melbournians, we're very proud of what we've actually done on our own backyard, and I think it is the envy of the world. But you are spot on with things that go right, and all over the world. I went to Azerbaijan and they had this fantastic seat that went right into the beach and into the water. Who would have thought? So there's lots of places that are doing it well, and I think we've got to take examples from all over the world.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested. You mentioned a room in Sydney at a hotel or something.
Oh, the Ace Hotel. Yeah, it's got one universal room. I
Oh,
went
I
asked to
wonder
look
what
at it. It was pretty nice, but
Yeah.
you can't really get into the hotel. You've got to go up this lift through a different entry and then around.
And then I wonder about hoists and things like that. Like how
yeah, I
much of
don't
this-
think they have hoists. No.
Oh well, I have spent. You know, I'm sort of trying to think of somewhere in Melbourne. Look, so places have got some good things and not such other good things. Having worked, you know, with a group of people with different access needs, and then 80% of disabilities are invisible, and so people who have invisible disabilities also have access needs. So, you know, considering all those access needs. Yeah, but I did spend some time in America, and it's partly to do with their laws, which have more teeth, their discrimination laws. And God knows what's going to happen to them now, but anyway, under the current regime. But yeah, I noticed a long time ago, actually, I went to Seattle because I'm also involved in performance and pursuing my performance interests. That I just had a totally different feeling, because even the little cafes along the place were all accessible because they're obliged to be by the law. And also Americans don't hesitate to sue. And so they even had accessible toilets. At that stage, I was more aware of my physical disabilities and not so much the range. But in some places, maybe more progressive places in the US anyway, I noticed some really good solutions and more widespread solutions, and also in Vancouver in Canada, and around transport as well. And also, you know, not the need to plan that I have now, you know, in the places I go to. There's always a need to plan in advance to know what's accessible and what's not accessible, because there are still barriers. So yeah, I guess and the other thing I noticed in Seattle was I stayed at the University of Washington, which is in Seattle, and it's about the vintage of Melbourne University, and they had some great solutions that fitted in with the heritage nature of the place, but still obliged to make it accessible, but good creative ways to do that.
I just quickly got a question online. First of all, Nick, can I ask you to go back into the centre so the people at home can see you? And then the question is to all the panellists. Why do organisations balk at universal design?
I don't think they balk at it. I think they need to understand it. And I think we are leading the world in universal design. Canada has just started an accreditation program on universal design, which actually puts measures around it, which I think is really helpful as well. But I think it's an education process, and tonight's been exactly that. I think I'm still learning definitely about some of the things that Tim and his family are encountering and what makes a good changing places facility and things like that. So, but maybe you can answer as well.
I suppose when I hear a question like that, one of the things that I'm quite aware of, and again, it's going back to our family experience with Alfie, and it's not so much as to why organisations balk at it, but I would counter that with why not? Because when we go out with Alfie, for example, we're surrounded by an entourage of people. So it's not just her, it's other family members, plus support workers. There's a huge range of people. And so it's a huge opportunity, I think also commercially as well, particularly if you're looking in the sort of tourism space. You know, if you're not just renting out a room for the person with additional access needs, there's a whole range of rooms that surround that person for their support networks as well. So yes, it may still be balked at, but I think that's incredibly short-sighted, I suppose.
I think it can also be preconceptions about cost, you know, that it will cost a lot, and also just concepts of disability that are based around traditional, you know, thoughts of disability as, well, you know, what's provided and what's not provided as the norm, and not expanding the idea of who we're providing for. Why one section of the population, not another section of the population? And I think there are still, you know, some undercurrents of that are just part of an unconscious bias.
We've sort of talked a fair amount about increasing mobility. I was wondering how much consideration is being put into allowing people more rest stops, maybe shade and seating. How do you find that balance?
It actually, you know how we talked about the Indigenous? If you go back to the way the Indigenous lived, and they had corroboree places, and they had resting places and welcoming places, and it goes back to that. We're starting to do that we're providing these hubs and rest where people can meet, rest. We're talking about females and feeling secure under lighting, where there's transport stops. We're soon, and you may not want to believe it, but it's going to happen, is we're going to have driverless cars within 10 years. is where do we pick them up? Do we get to a place where we can identify that's got clear building numbers and all of those things? To do exactly that is to create these areas that we can identify that gives us a hub. Same as your home, is that you've got something clearly identifiable and welcome that we can go hub to hub to hub, so that it actually makes it easy and usable to get around.
Yeah, and I think some of our consultants in the MAPCO public realm also pointed out the need for that, the need for being able to withdraw and to have withdrawal spaces.
Yeah, so when I guess in part of the reason we came to doing this event, Natasha from the Public Records Office contacted us, and there was an article, I think, wasn't there, Natasha, in the local newspaper about a proposal that we put forward for the Royal Park Nature Play space, which many of you in the room may be familiar with. And it's a fantastic piece of public space in terms of providing nature play for children. But one of the bugbears of ours, an opportunity that we saw, is it's right next to the Royal Children's Hospital. Now, we spend lots of time in that hospital, and one of the key missing pieces, I think, to that piece of landscape architecture is sheltered space. So in between space, it's often the first foray out into the real world of children spending huge amounts of time in the Children's Hospital. And so there's a missing piece there. So we did put together a proposal called Weaving Accessible Play, which I think City of Melbourne have taken up, and they're running with it and using it as part of the new Royal Park master plan. But yeah, I think there's always more need for those sorts of amenities, for sure.
Sorry, I had a question for all of you. So I'm not an architect, but I work for an architect in the sort of design technology space. So I'm not always on projects in the way that the designers are. But I'm super keen, and I think you all sort of touched on it in different ways, of advocating for, hey, we're all going to need this someday in some way at some point. So I'm curious to hear, not necessarily the solution or advice, but what have you heard or seen to be the best way to advocate for those who want to get behind this and kind of help push the agenda forward, let's say?
I think it's ownership. You know, it's not, I think I mentioned it, it's not about people over there. It's actually the moment that we all look at our own lives. And I'm going to hand the mic to Susie because she's pregnant and has a toddler. So she can talk universal design and change areas and all sorts of stuff.
And gender balance, because there are not enough toilet facilities with change tables that enable dads to go and change a nappy. Yes, I can definitely talk to that. It was amazing, that eye-opening moment when, as a designer, I feel like I consider this, and you know, you can only really consider it to the point of what you know. And it was eye-opening to suddenly have a daughter in a pram and realise how inaccessible the city is, and in all the different forms. And going back a few years, I've broke my back as well, and just appreciating the tiniest change in a texture or surface can really impact your enjoyment and experience of a space. And so simple things, and whilst that was a short-lived experience, and it has framed how I like to try and design and consult with people who know it better and can advise me better. Yeah, I can, and then yeah, being pregnant with a toddler, and it's exhausting.
And also, if you add to the 20% of about 20% of the population that is classified as disabled, people with chronic illness brings it up to 45%. And then you add on their friends, their family, their support workers, whoever, and that brings it up to about 60% of people who require access.
There's one term that I'd get everyone to embrace, and that is we've got accessibility needs. Everyone has an accessibility need of some description. I think the more we describe that as an accessibility need, the more we actually understand it and own it.
Okay. Yeah, I've got it. Thank you. I am Kelly Miller. I feel I have to introduce myself. Nick sort of pulled me out in the crowd, and I'm standing in. Apologies for those who view are turning. Thanks for your presentation. You've touched on so many important things, whether it's the stats, it is us. Universal design is about us, so I appreciate all the different approaches you've brought to that. The functional considerations you've outlined, Nick, complying with building code and so on will get you, in inverted commas, a compliant building, but does it make it functional? No, it will not make it functional. But I won't go on all the good things that you've addressed because others have already spoken to that. I want to ask though, universal design is really about macro and micro considerations, from whether or not you have a site, how you plan that site on your building, do you face how you approach public transport, all the way down to how you have a kitchen in a commercial building. That for some people who are neurodivergent, the smells that emanate into an office can be really challenging. Yeah. Whereas for a person with vision loss, the olfactory sort of sense is part of their wayfinding. So that could be really beneficial in a shopping centre of some form, or down to that really micro stage of choosing a drawer dishwasher compared to a pull-down door dishwasher. It just makes it easier for all of us. If you were providing advice to someone who is starting on a greenfield site on what kind of strategies they would employ to make sure that people think about all of these, all of the team that you've got on yours, Susie, how do you try and get these people all together? Where do you think you'd start with that?
I'd start by selecting a really good team who can advise us on all of this. And I go again to Nick because we engaged Morris Goading into our team from the very beginning, and at the forefront we got all of our consultants together with the client and talked about, we didn't put any plans or any drawings or any sketches or ideas on the plan. We just said, here's our site, what could you, each of you, do as a consultant? What can you bring to this that would make this the most special experience and project of it? And everyone came, because it was a blank the Arts Precinct isn't a blank canvas, but we treated it as such to engage everyone and put their best ideas forward. And I think that was a really important strategy. Engaging a client early, getting them on board is super important. We have a fabulous client, Development Victoria and MAPCO are engaged, they care. Being in an arts and culture space, they are important. We also have project stakeholders who are super engaged, being NGV and the Arts Centre Melbourne. So working with the right clients is also incredibly important. They have to, share the same values with you, and you have to have the right consultant team that share those values too.
Thank you.
And you have to challenge convention. I'm probably going to go against maybe what one of Janice's advisors said, but I actually think it's okay to get lost in a garden. And I think it's okay to actually feel like you're getting to secret pockets and you go into different areas. And it's okay to have stairs. You know why? Because stairs take people away from lifts. And stairs are good for exercise. As long as, and I agree wholeheartedly with what she said about feeling included and trying to actually do a bit of reverse discrimination of having really good seating in areas near the turret so that it actually became a nice meeting point rather than, and the stairs actually become a bit clinical at the end of the day. It was just a transition space. Trying to challenge that, but also the art of compromise is you're never going to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, well, some people with who are neurodivergent or have complex mental health or been in the prison system, being homeless, combinations of those things would be alarmed by getting lost, and it would, a range of things would keep them away from even going there. So, it can affect different people in different ways. But I agree about making you know, different ways of getting access friendly and gathering points. Yeah, but some people, you know, people are affected in lots of different ways. Oh, and also, can I just say, I think training's important. If you can get someone to get training, when we deliver training, we always find that the introduction of the social model turns people's minds around about how they regard disability, and is always something they remark on.
I had a question, sorry, just at the back here, for all of the group around a challenge I'm facing. So I'm an urban designer and have tried to become more literate in this space, but I've found the climate risk effect of flooding has become a really big barrier. Poor choice of word, but in terms of designing precincts, thinking about building access, you mentioned about NGV Contemporary, an example of a building that lands in an area that will flood with a relatively high frequency within 30 to 40 years at its ground level. Are there examples around the world or locally where you're seeing really exceptional examples of where we can deal with that flood risk that's coming from changing rain patterns from climate and providing this really high quality universal arrival point to our buildings and public spaces?
Can I tell you, the city of Port Melbourne is creating a rod for our own back because climate change, as we know, is real. But unfortunately, many of the ways to solve it is putting vertical platform lifts in to get that height, to get above the flood line. I can only implore people to do graded walkways because by the very nature of water levels, if you can do graded walkways, it means that at various heights you can still get access. And it still is non-mechanical because lifts break down and they're affected by water and they're affected by electrical and all of these things. And they become non-functional. And that's one of the key issues to this. So I can only implore you to really talk about ramped and graded walkways and non-mechanical means. And that's easier said than done, I know, in building sense, but it really, it's terrible when you can't get access into a building because the electricity's down.
I agree, those lifts break down all the time.
And get vandalised.
Yeah.
Hello. This question goes to kind of everyone. So I have a younger sibling, younger sister. She also has a disability, a bit more mental than physical. And I come with a product design, industrial design background. So I wonder how important the product design is for compared to the space. Sometimes the space can be designed for everyone, but the product or the things that I put inside make it accessible to everyone or easier for everyone to use. And is that something you guys often think about, is the product that goes into the space?
Absolutely. There's accessible barbecues with various heights. There's lighting levels that can actually shoot down or shoot up. And I think that's one of our big issues is is encouraging everyone to look at products that actually bring out the best in an environment. Illumination of numbers and things like that, floor surfaces and different textures. For a lot of people with hearing impairments, it's actually the sound of movement that actually helps them to guide them through. So getting that acoustic element. And once again, the whole sense of feeling well for somebody who might be neurodivergent and how much sound's projecting off the wall and the textures. And actually, I'm probably entering into your realm.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard, and it talks to your point earlier on, Nick, that you know, this is in many ways one of our most valuable assets, and there are companies, I think, out there at the moment that are mapping significant public spaces like airports and so forth in incredibly fine detail, and it means that for those with additional needs, we have a very clear picture of that space before you visit the space. There are lots of other initiatives like the daffodil or yellow flower initiative for hidden disabilities. So these micro plugins are very important. Everything needs to coexist.
And there are also beacons that can be installed so that people who are blind or low vision can find their way with their mobile phones. So.
I've got one. Well, we've got a whole bunch online, so I want to throw to someone online first. How do you suggest advocating for universal design in schools? And how do specialist teachers, such as myself, teacher of the deaf and special education, get the opportunity to meet with architects, engineers, and project managers who appear to use Google to select equipment that end up being totally not fit for purpose, instead of asking those of us who actually work in schools and know our students and which sound field systems actually work?
Consultation.
It's actually a great question, is to proactive develop technical committees where we get people such as that person online and people with lived experience to come together, that when architects are designing, I haven't met an architect who didn't embrace positive co-design. They actually embrace it. It's actually something that they thirst. It's actually, so I actually think engaging and being proactive and saying, I want to be part of consultation, actually forming groups is so important. And it's sad that we don't, because I think it's the most valuable tool we've got is co-design and looking backwards before you look forward.
I'd encourage, agree absolutely with what Nick said, and Janice, consultation is super important, but as a method to sort of start that process, I'd encourage her to engage with the peak bodies representing design, AILA, and the Architectural Institute. What's the Interior Institute? Design Institute, you know, contacting some of those institutes to try and encourage some of that consultation going the other way. So rather than, because sometimes it can be the client becoming the barrier, not allowing that consultation to occur. But if it comes from the other way, from the architect or the designer or the interior designer saying, hi, I've had this person reach out through the body, I'd like to engage it the other way. That could be your method.
Thank you for your presentation. We've seen the banners for 1981 public awareness campaign for the Global Year of Disability out in the foyer in the exhibition. Is it appropriate? Is there an appetite for a federal publicly produced campaign to make everyone feel that they belong as such in design?
Well, I think any way you can spread awareness is great, and yeah, I guess there's a lot of different ways people access information now. So yeah, and a campaign that was aware of that, and yeah, spread the news around would be great.
On the stage, but I think the Arts Precinct is an exception of a project that has engaged with consultants, like access consultants or the community at the beginning of a process, because that's, I'm going to say, that's probably not generally how civic projects work. They don't engage with the users or at the beginning of the process. So it's like a good example, but it's not the norm. And I think you have to go, something that Janice said, it's kind of like this obligation. People or architects or designers or the client integrate access or universal design as an obligation, not because they're actually interested in the outcomes, unfortunately. So I think it is really important that we have to have maybe like raising awareness about why inclusive design is important for everyone to access the built environment. So, and that's the big question. I think it's reflected in some of the questions in the audience about why it's not integrated. What do we do? I don't have the answers. Maybe it's education, raising awareness, educating architects, maybe has to start at university, Maybe we have to change the way we teach design. Maybe we have to update the standards because they're based on particular types of people, like the male body, for instance. We have to relook at the standards, policy, have to relook at everything. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Sal, and add to that and it talks to that sort of initial point in the presentation that diversity is a fact of life, but I don't think we see enough representation out there. That's an issue for us, and I think if the more people that we can see with diverse needs out and about and contributing in society, because there are a lot, it normalizes it and it makes it not feeling like an obligation, but an opportunity really to design for everybody. So,
and that's around a lot of different things like removing barriers to education, to employment, so that people are seen in all the places everyone goes to.
And a few more awards in architectural design and interior design actually celebrating this, because I reckon there's a lot of good stuff out there and we should be celebrating it. That's the other thing, is we are doing a lot of good stuff and we should celebrate it and make a point of celebrating it so that people go, well, I want to be up on that stage.
Thank you. It's actually a bit of a follow-up to your comments just then. I mean, my question was that everything being seen here is pretty much public institutions or public buildings. And obviously it's got to also go through the private client side as well. But on the public side, you know, how much do you feel the governments and public institutions are aware of this need for universal design? Not an obligation, but aware of a need to have it. And it seems to me there are probably some exceptions, but the majority of cases, they're looking at budgets, they're looking at additional costs they're going to have to incur. Are they really committed to universal design as you people are talking about? And if they're not, how do we change that opinion?
My feeling is that government institutions are often more accessible, physically accessible, than some other private places.
I'm talking about new design, new buildings.
Yeah, new ones and old ones.
It's a great question. I worked on the new Footscray Hospital. Anyone from the Victorian Health Authority here? Okay, we can talk openly then. They have within the brief, there's a gentleman by the name of Michael Walker, and he's been the Universal Design Facilitator for the state of Victoria for the last 10 years. And it's been on the agenda. Victoria is actually leading Australia in universal design. Every tender for government projects must respond to how they'll address universal design. However, when it comes time to actually measuring universal design in a project like the new Footscray Hospital, we had to somewhat fight for additional changing places, additional parents' rooms, some quiet rooms, sensory rooms, things because they weren't tangible. They weren't in the brief. And so all of a sudden you've got to fight against the developer with the government money sharing that around and things like that. And so we went part of the way there, I'd say a fair way. Would we have liked to have done more? Absolutely. But once again, that's that compromise of big development. But it pains me right now that every school doesn't have absolute universal design accessibility to their portables, for example. Well, technically, they don't put accessibility into portable buildings. So they're the things that we need to put on an agenda and say these are the things when we need guidelines and universal design principles and guidelines in health, in school and education, so that there are guiding principles so people can point at them.
Can I ask a question? Very, very quickly. Very, very quickly, I promise. It would be easy to design a building from the ground up and make it accessible to everyone. What about heritage buildings? And we have a lot of them. One of them is Parliament House. That is not accessible. University buildings, Melbourne Uni, so many beautiful buildings, not accessible. What can we do there?
Is to buy $150 worth of signs and tell me where I can go. And without being flippant, because you can't get up sandstone steps. at times you just can't do that. Just tell me where I can go to get around so that I can plan and do that. And then as you're master planning and changing it, make sure that you push the boundaries. There is no reason we can't spend money on beautifully sandstone clad lifts or other things down the track as a master plan. But signage is a very, very cost-effective way of giving me reassurance where I need to go.
And have information on websites in advance about where you can go and where you can't go. And yeah. And also have, yeah.
Agreed. Sometimes I don't have the answer.
You can also have disability action plans which go 5 years or so into the future, where you allot budget for having changes made. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, heritage is often used as an excuse for not doing anything. And there have been cases where, it's gone to arbitrate, sort of mediation or gone to court even, and access has trumped heritage. And also there was I'm not sure if they're still there, but there was an architect's firm in Canberra who specialised in access solutions for heritage buildings. And I saw overseas too that people can do it.
That's loaded questions.
Oh, that's a big question.
Architecture and what deserves to be like heritage listed. Anyway. Natasha, are we out of time?
I was just going to wrap up. Yeah, I thank you everybody for coming along. It was a fantastic evening and some great questions. I'd like to thank Susie, Janice, Nick, and obviously Salem as well for putting most of the work. Salem did all of the work out in the exhibition space, to be honest. Importantly, I'd also like to thank Jensen Hughes as well, who have sponsored this event very generously, and Miles Audio as well, who have provided a lot of the audio equipment that we see here in front of us. So thank you everyone for coming along. It was a very informative evening.
Can I just quickly add to that last question, sorry, that our disability discrimination law isn't very strong around retrofitting places, the obligation, the legal compulsion to do that. So, to fix up the laws as well.